Thank you everyone for inviting me to speak today, and I want to begin by reiterating the point that Manal made about the importance of this hunger strike that is happening today on the 18th day, I believe, by Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. The hunger strike was launched on the 27th of September, coinciding with the anniversary of the Second Intifada. And it is an open-ended strike, as Manal pointed out, the first in many years. It is aimed at establishing rights for prisoners in Israeli jails, including the end to solitary confinement, including the right to family visits, including the end to abuses that prisoners are facing. And this strike, I find it remarkable that there has been virtually no commentary on this strike in any of the mainstream media. It's just been completely blanketed out of the news. So I think this is something that we really need to talk about more, because it is reaching a critical point. About 70 of the prisoners who are engaged in the strike have been transferred to other prisons, and the prison authorities have been refusing salt and fluids for many of the prisoners, which is life-threatening in many cases. Many of these prisoners are actually involved in the strike from solitary confinement as well. This is a very important action, not just for the issue of the prisoners that they face on the day-to-day basis. It's also an important action because of what it demonstrates, that Palestinian prisoners remain at the forefront of the Palestinian struggle. They remain an inspiration to the Palestinian people all around the world at a time when the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian leadership refuses to speak, refuses to challenge the ongoing occupation, the ongoing colonization that is happening. So Palestinian prisoners really do remain the core of our struggle, and I think this is something we really need to emphasize. It also shows the importance of international solidarity, because the fact that there's no mention of this in the media, the fact that there is no international pressure from the so-called international community, there is no support from the Red Cross, the international community of the Red Cross. The only way this strike is being supported is by the actions of people like yourselves here today, people like the students at SOAS yesterday who engaged in a hunger strike, and LSE as well, and these kinds of activities. This is really, I think, it shows the importance of international solidarity. So just wanted to begin by reiterating this is really a very, very important event, and we should remember the prisoners as we speak today. I'm going to come back to the question of international solidarity, but what I wanted to talk about in general today was the current conjuncture of the Palestinian struggle, and particularly focusing on the question of classes, as Manal pointed out. But to begin with, it is necessary, I think, to begin with some kind of history. Like all political struggles, it's impossible to understand what's going on today without knowing what has happened in the past. And in the case of Palestine, this means recognizing that the ethnic cleansing that took place in 1947, 1948, in which 3/4 of the Palestinian population were driven out of their homes, is not just a painful historical memory. It lives with us today in everything we do. What Palestinians call a Nakba, or catastrophe, remains very much part of the lived reality. It is felt, for example, in the longing of 7 million Palestinians around the world to return to their homes and land from which they were expelled in 47-48. It also is seen in the segregation and Bantustanization of the 3 million or more than 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, divided from one another by Israeli settlements, military checkpoints, and Israeli-only highways. These open-air prisons, surrounded by the apartheid wall and its associated infrastructure, mean that Palestinians are now confined to around 12% of historic Palestine in these areas. And a Nakba remains with those Palestinians, of course, who stayed on the land and became citizens of Israel itself, forced to live as second-class citizens in a state built on the destruction of their national identity. It's sometimes difficult, I think, for people outside of the region to understand this ongoing reality of a Nakba to the Palestinian existence. because of the way the mainstream media presents Palestine as just this irreconcilable conflict, fed by some kind of irrational violence or hate, seeing the solution as being some kind of paternalistic intervention by the West with little regard for the bloody hand of colonialism in the actual creation of the Palestine problem in the first place. And rarely does media coverage go beyond just the clips of a few short clips of Jerusalem or the West Bank or Gaza, and peppered with reassuring messages from experts and Israeli government spokespeople. But the historical reality of this dispossession that took place over 60 years ago means that Palestinians are now fragmented across at least 4 different geographical spaces: the Arab world, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and inside Israel itself. And of course, the Palestinians who remain in the broader diaspora scattered across the world. This really goes to the core of the Palestinian question, and I'm going to come back to this later on in the talk. But I wanted to emphasize that understanding this history, understanding the root cause of colonialism, and in creating this struggle in the first place, really needs to be central to our understanding of what is going on today. But beyond this historical context, there are, I think, many questions that need to be clarified by those who do support the Palestinian struggle. And I think, most importantly, there is a weakness of understanding how Palestine fits into the broader question of the Middle East. The West's complete support for Israel, since its inception, has been based upon its centrality, or the centrality of the Middle East, to imperialism as a broader project. Obviously, Britain played a key role in this, going back to the Mandate period, 1917, and the Balfour Declaration, the creation of Israel itself, and continuing through to today. And I think Trevor is going to speak more on Britain's role. But it is clear from the historical record that the Middle East, particularly since the Second World War, has been a central component of how capitalism functions at the global scale. This is because of the region's enormous supplies of oil. The Gulf region, in particular, is estimated to hold or surpass 1/4 of the world's oil production in the coming decades. And this gives the region a vital importance to the world economy. It means that those who dominate the region also dominate the world market as a whole. And since the Second World War, this has meant primarily the United States, supported, of course, by countries such as Britain. But you see how central to this domination of the entire globe, control of the Middle East actually is. I don't mean here just the direct ownership of oil supplies. What I mean is the protection of those oil supplies from any popular and democratic control by the people of the whole Middle East region. And for this reason, the Western imperialism developed a system of control since the Second World War, and particularly since the Second World War consolidated, set up a system of control based upon a network of dictatorships across the whole of the Middle East. And Israel played a very, very significant role in this, and continues to this day, in this extension of US power and broader Western power across the Middle East region as a whole. It could always be relied upon to act against any anti-colonial or national struggles against imperialism, particularly post-1967. And I just want to mention as a side note here, I think framing and understanding the struggle in Palestine in the question of the broader Middle East region is absolutely central to any kind of politics and political project. And we have to be clear, I think, that any attempt to explain the United States' support for Israel, for example, by an Israeli lobby or something in the United States, is just not only false, it is also damaging politically. We need to see it from an anti-imperialist perspective and understanding the role of the Middle East as a whole. But this is also why I think the tremendous uprisings that we have seen over the last, over this year across the Arab world really are important to Palestine, not just to the individual countries where these uprisings have taken place. They do not represent just the overthrow of individual dictators, Mubarak and Ben Ali in Tunisia, and Mubarak in Egypt. But they go to the heart of this system of control that was established and has been so central to the West over the last few decades. And in their essence, I'm not saying necessarily in how they're expressed politically today, but in their essence, these struggles are not just a struggle that are national. They are a struggle against this system of control as a whole. They are a struggle against the vast inequalities we see across the region, and they are a struggle for the dignity of the people across the Middle East. And they also inevitably confront the role of Israel itself as a key node in this imperialist chain. And we can see this most clearly in Egypt, but it's true across the Middle East, all of the Middle East. So this is the first point I think I wanted to make, that the needing to understand the question of Palestine, not just what is going on in the borders of Palestine, and certainly not just as what is going on in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, but starting from this perspective of imperialism and the Middle East as a whole. But in Palestine itself, this US-backed regional order also has significant implications for how we understand the struggle. And here, I think it means most particularly that the United States, European powers such as Britain and Israel have worked for decades in attempting to foster a layer of Palestinian leadership that will administer and support this system of control. Follow the diktats of the United States and allow Israel to continue its role as a key pillar of imperialist power across the region. This is not, again, a new process. This is from the inception of Israel. This has been the intention of the imperialist powers. But for the West Bank and Gaza Strip, it began clearly immediately after the occupation in 1967 with, for example, the Allon Plan, which I'm sure many people here are familiar with. But the Allon Plan, drawn up by an Israeli General Yigal Allon, essentially looked at cantonizing the West Bank into fragmented areas, finding a Palestinian leadership that would take control of these areas and administer the occupation on behalf of Israel itself. This plan continued through the 1970s, for example, with what was called the village leagues, where Israel attempted to find mayors in villages across the West Bank that would be armed by the Israeli military, Palestinian mayors that would be armed by the Israeli military and would essentially administer the system of occupation. And most recently, the village leagues failed because of the Palestinian uprising, the first Intifada, and the struggles through the 70s. But most recently, we see this same logic, this logic of occupation, trying to find a Palestinian leadership that would administer and be part of this regional order. We see this most recently in the process, the Oslo process that began in 1993 and continued throughout the 90s. In this process of negotiations, we saw the Palestinian leadership, or much of the Palestinian leadership, return to the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Much of this leadership had, throughout the 70s and 80s, been corrupted by money particularly from the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and other states. This leadership returned and was again expected to play the role of quietening the population, accepting the reality of Zionist colonization, accepting the reality of this US-led regional order. There's no time to go into this in detail, but I think the question of the role of the Gulf states in all of this is really quite key. The fact that many of the large businessmen, the large supporters of the Palestinian PLO and now the Palestinian Authority made their money in the Gulf states and made millions and millions in the Gulf states really is quite important to understanding the class dynamics in Palestine today. And it means, again, if we're trying to understand Palestine, we need to step back and look at the regional dynamics. So what happened through the Oslo process, this return of the Palestinian leadership, this process of negotiations, we see developing, or what had developed was a narrowing of the Palestinian question to just the question of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And this, I think, is something that we all need to fight against in the way that we conceive of Palestine. The fragmentation of the people has meant that the question of Palestine is just reduced to the politics of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. What is seen as being the Palestinian state is some patchwork of territories looking now as though it's just going to be the West Bank. But we see this kind of logic in the way that colonialism, settler colonialism, continues to function. And what this meant is that in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, through the Oslo years, through the 1990s, there was a layer of Palestinian officials associated with the Palestinian Authority. There was a layer of Palestinian businessmen who worked closely with the Palestinian Authority, who essentially benefited from their role as mediating the occupation in these territories. So they were given, for example, the rights to import and export certain goods, monopoly rights. They were given the ability to travel, whereas that ability was denied to the majority of the Palestinian people. They were given the economic fruits that flowed from the occupation was shared with this layer of both officials and business people within the West Bank and Gaza, because of their role as intermediaries between the occupation and the Palestinian people as a whole. This layer of people continues today to be the social base of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, the leadership in the West Bank, the Abu Mazen-led Palestinian Authority, and speaking obviously on behalf of the PLO itself. But at the same time as this Oslo process unfolded in the 90s, there was a fragmentation and Bantustanization. I use the word Bantustan referring, of course, to the attempt by the South African apartheid regime to enclose the black population in South Africa in these isolated territories that would be considered as homelands, and they would be seen in that way, but they would need permits to come in and out. There would be very little development in these areas, and there would be, again, a system of control that looks very, very similar to what has happened in the West Bank and Gaza. So this process of fragmentation and Bantustanization deepened through the 90s. It also meant through the 90s that the Palestinian labour market, or Palestinian workers in these areas, were progressively separated from the Israeli labour market as a whole, except as a reserve army of labour, perhaps through the permits being a certain few thousand, 10,000s of permits being allowed in and out depending on the political conjuncture. So we saw a separation of the working class from the Israeli labour market, this layer of Palestinians developing as an intermediary between the occupation and the people as a whole. And of course, around this very complex bureaucratic structure based upon permits, based upon checkpoints, different zoning laws that applied to different areas in the West Bank, and of course backed by always the Israeli military and the system of military orders. Now this system, despite talk about the end of Oslo, etc., this system continues today. And it's very important to realize, if any of you have visited the West Bank or Gaza, you know this well, but the key elements of this system of control continue to exist. So, for example, electricity, water, the internet, all remain under the control of the Israelis. Okay, there may be a Palestinian company that you'll pay your electricity bill to, but in the final analysis, behind that Palestinian company is an Israeli electricity supplier. The same with the internet, the same with water, the same with virtually all of the goods and economic activity that continues in the West Bank. The other important part of this, and this is an important part of the story of the class structure as it evolved in these areas, was an increasing dependence upon the Palestinian Authority itself as an employer. Okay, so we saw an expansion of the Palestinian Authority essentially becoming a very large employer, but of course the Palestinian Authority, its money and its funding came in the final analysis from the West and from taxes collected by Israel itself. So in this sense, the control of the tap of funds, of finances to the Palestinian Authority was always in the hands of the West. And of course, this creates an incredible political dependency, an incredible political pressure to follow the diktats of the Western interests. So, to summarize, that's if you like, a very basic picture of the kind of class structure that evolved in the West Bank and Gaza Strip through the 1990s. And I think also, and this is something perhaps we can go into in discussion, it tells us something about the forms of resistance that we saw or that we see by the Palestinian people in the occupied territories, because it becomes very difficult with this separation from the labour market, the reliance upon the Palestinian Authority, the fragmentation, etc., to engage in the kinds of struggles that we might, as a left, see in things like labour strikes, industrial action, etc. It becomes very difficult to engage in those activities effectively because of this process of fragmentation. This is part of it. It's not the full story, but it's part of the story, I think, of understanding the weakness of the Palestinian left through these decades. And also part of the story, again, not the full story, but part of the story of the rise of Hamas and other Islamist movements that were based more upon, if you like, a petty bourgeois layer within Palestinian society. Now, I want to turn to the most kind of recent feature of this struggle, which is the Palestinian Reform and Development Program, the PRDP, which was first presented in November 2007. This PRDP, I'm sure many people in the room have heard of the PRDP, but the PRDP is it's essentially the economic program of the Palestinian Authority. Okay, it's the program that the Palestinian Authority will follow, and it was first presented in November 2007, and it was drawn up by the World Bank, essentially drawn up by the World Bank. It was based upon very detailed prescriptions from the World Bank and other international financial institutions. Again, referring to this tap of money and funds that the PA relies upon. The funding that the PA gets from Western donors goes through a bank account that is controlled by the World Bank, and the World Bank distributes this funding depending upon the implementation of the Palestinian Reform and Development Program, the PRDP. So it's very much part of, if you like, this process of dependency that I mentioned earlier. And it's become, since that time, the guiding framework for economic policy, particularly in the West Bank. It's explicitly neoliberal, this PRD program, and I would advise people to really look at this program in detail. It's having a very dramatic effect on society in the West Bank. It promotes, and this is a quote, a diversified and thriving free market economy led by a pioneering private sector that is in harmony with the Arab world and is open to regional and global markets. So this is the kind of logic that's behind it. It includes things like a very strong fiscal tightening promoted or imposed by the IMF and the World Bank, perhaps stronger than any program imposed on any other state in the region. The Palestinian Authority committed itself to a 21% reduction in jobs by 2010 as part of the PRDP. It promised not to increase public sector salaries. This is at a time of very high inflation. And it also meant that subsidization of electricity and water bills would require that citizens present, or it ended any kind of subsidization and required that citizens presented a certificate of payment in order to receive any municipal or government services. So across the West Bank, they've started to put in water meters and electricity meters that basically mean that you have to pay your electricity bill. Now, this is very important in the context of the West Bank because so many people used to rely upon you know, they just couldn't pay their bills because of the Intifada, because of the ongoing occupation, and etc. So being forced to do it in this way through these meters, this metering system, was very much an element of the PIDP. By the way, these meters were actually presented, I think, to the Palestinian Authority from the neoliberal government in South Africa, the ANC-led neoliberal government in South Africa. So the continuation is still there. In regards to its development component, that's, if you like, the economic or fiscal side of it. But in this development component, the PIDP looks at building industrial zones along the sides of these isolated territories that we see evolving in the West Bank. So these industrial zones are explicitly aimed at bringing together Israeli, Palestinian and regional capital to employ cheap Palestinian labor. Okay? And they are seen very explicitly as a way of exporting goods that are produced in the industrial zone to the broader Middle East, particularly again to the Gulf states, so fruits and vegetables and things to the Gulf states. So we see this is again part of a broader regional configuration of the area, tying Israeli capital, Palestinian capital and broader regional capital together. We see very clearly how this kind of model of development, this economic plan, really normalizes or internalizes the structures of the occupation within daily Palestinian life. Okay? It becomes normal to be employed in an industrial zone back in a factory perhaps owned by an Israeli investor. This is the model that is being pursued by the World Bank and Palestinian Authority. Okay, so when we hear, for example, Fayyad say, or Abu Mazen say that the World Bank gave the Palestinian Authority a seal of approval for its excellent state building project, excellent state building plans, this is what he means. This is the type of development model that is being promoted. And there are many examples that I could go into around this. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about what are the results of this process on the ground. And there's four things I think I want to highlight. First of all, it means the increasingly heavy reliance upon aid of the Palestinian Authority. Aid dependency, which is what I mean by this is aid measured as a percentage of gross national income, is one of the highest in the world in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It reached 49% in 2002, okay, and it has remained high through subsequent years. So this tap of aid, we can see this anytime the Palestinian Authority appears to step out of line, the Western governments can say, we're not going to pay you this month's salaries, essentially. Okay, so we see this kind of reliance upon aid. But it also means, and this is, I think, is very important to understanding the dynamics in the region, it means a vastly increasing inequality within Palestinian society in these areas. These neoliberal policies that have been promoted by the World Bank have benefited some people in the area. Okay, there are some people who are benefiting very much from this, and anyone who has visited Ramallah in recent years will have noticed this, a massive building boom, hotels, malls going up, cafes, etc. It's really quite extraordinary to see how the area has been transformed over the last 10 years. So we see there is a tiny elite, a very, very tiny elite that is benefiting from this process. But at the same time, we're seeing a widening of inequalities across Palestinian society as a whole. Okay, a dramatic widening of inequalities. Unemployment, for example, in 2010 was close to 1/4 of the workforce, 23.7%. And per capita GDP was only just under $2,000. Okay, this is in 2010. Alongside of this increasing inequality is something that, again, people all around the world are very familiar with. And that is a very large increase in financial debt in the financial markets, in the extension of debt to Palestinians in the West Bank in particular. There was a tripling in the amount of bank credit from 2008 to 2010. okay, according to the Palestinian Monetary Authority. And what this means is that more and more people, again, this is very visible to anyone who goes to somewhere like Ramallah, you will see more and more people will have loans for houses, loans for cars, credit card debts. Okay, it's a very, very wide phenomena across the region. Okay, these areas, real estate, automobile, credit cards, it's a dramatic change within Palestinian society. And it means that the development that we see in places like Ramallah is very much a debt-fueled development. And it's strikingly transformed the nature of the city itself. Billboards, advertising, new housing projects, cars, buying things on loans and credits, etc. It's really a remarkable transformation. But this is also increasing the inequalities across the region as a whole. Ramallah is becoming the center of the Palestinian Authority, of international NGOs, of international organizations, whereas the rest of the West Bank, the gap between Ramallah and the rest of the West Bank is increasing itself. So we see increasing inequalities at all levels. And this, of course, really has a political impact too. And this, I think, is an important part of understanding the nature of the political struggle that we see, where people become so tied to debt that it becomes difficult to conceive of building beyond that. Okay, you worry about your next paycheck because it means being able to pay off your loans. Okay, and this, again, I'm not saying this is across the area, but in somewhere like Ramallah is a very, very clear indication. So I'm setting out this picture to say this is the context in which talk about the state declaration that we heard throughout September really needs to be seen in this context. Okay, this is the type of state, okay, that is being envisioned by the Palestinian Authority leadership. Okay, I'm just going to conclude with a few comments about, you know, what does this mean politically and what does this mean from here. I think, as I said at the outset, the new situation that is posed by the Arab uprisings, okay, is something I think that changes the playing field to a very large extent. The impact of the struggles in Egypt and the ongoing revolutionary processes, these have not finished. Much of the old elites remain in power, but the people themselves have been widely emboldened by these processes. So in Egypt, we see ongoing, very powerful strike waves occurring. Things like this that really question the relationship or the system of control that was set up in the area. It questioned the relationship between Israel and countries like Egypt. So this, I think, is something that changes the playing field. But what does politically this type of analysis I've outlined, I think it means that, firstly, the fight against this process of fragmentation is very, very important. Understanding Palestine isn't just the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It isn't just what is talked about in terms of a state. It incorporates Palestinians inside Israel, it incorporates the right of return of Palestinian refugees as central to any demand, any political struggle. It also means that as a left, we need to look outwards, not look at what is happening at the level of the elite negotiations, but look to the struggles in the broader Middle East. Look to the struggles of Palestinians inside Israel itself. So this fragmentation, I think, a fight against fragmentation is key. Secondly, a refusal to normalize with Zionism, I think, has to be central to any politics. What I mean by this is that the kinds of development policies that I explained earlier really mean normalizing and accepting occupation and the structures of occupation. But it's not just what is going on in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It means also refusing to work with any of the Israeli state organizations. Okay? Refusing to any of these kind of joint Israeli-Palestinian projects that promote normalization. Okay? At the heart, and this is not what I'm saying is not new, it's something that's really been central to the Palestinian struggle for decades, but this refusal to negotiate normalize relations with Zionism, I think is really key. Of course, what does this mean practically? It means the movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, the BDS movement, that is having really a very powerful impact at a global level. And I'm sure many people here are involved in the BDS struggle. And thirdly, I think the processes that I've described indicate that the question of class struggle within Palestinian society is also key. Okay? The kinds of inequality and deepening inequalities that we see through these things such as the PRDP mean that the question of class is raised to the forefront. Okay? And this is something that people are talking about much more within Palestinian society. We see the beginnings of some independent unions, for example, forming. And I think the struggles around the industrial zones will be part of this process. So the question of the class struggle, I think, is something that we need to put back on the table as really quite key to what happens for the Palestinian struggle as a whole. It's not just a question of the national rights, it's also very much a class question. But I will end by saying that the struggle of the prisoners that was launched 18 days ago shows that the Palestinian people remain a fighting and a powerful movement that will continue to struggle, no matter what kinds of pressures, no matter what kind of brutality is placed upon them. And the fact that these prisoners are striking and continue to strike today shows that the Palestinian people will win. Thank you.